Welcome to The Best Medicine. I'm your host, Dr. Bradley H. Werrell, and we're here to explore options and potentials to help us grow as individuals and as a community with one another in these difficult times and challenging times. We're exploring all manner of potentials related to the human experience, physical, psychological, medical, spiritual. It's a wonderful opportunity that we now experience in this critical phase of our human evolution. And I welcome you to join us in our podcast, become more aware, and identify with people who are helpful and supportive of you in your efforts as a human being on this planet and elsewhere too. We're going to be meeting people who are doing things that are widely variant from what is so-called normal within our society, in the creative space, within the social space. Our common purpose, seeking to generate positive potentials to improve the lives of everyone in our sphere of influence, and to expand that sphere of influence so that we may positively influence others that are not yet engaged directly with us. That's the goal here. We will learn more about each other as we go. I wish you the very best. Thank you very much for tuning in. So it's like this, it's like the, what a day, man. I lost my keys yesterday. So I carry two sets of keys, right? And one set of keys is like most of my keys, and the other one has the office keys too, and that's the one I lost. And I'm like frantic yesterday. I lost them maybe 12 hours ago or so. And I was frantic a little bit, and then I'm like, okay. Woke up this morning, I can't get in my office because it's got my office key, and there's no way I can get a spare, and I show up way before anybody shows up there. So I'm like, okay, what does this mean, right? And so I'm like, you like when you do something like that, you just reconsider where you were before, and you go back slowly, and you're looking at all the surfaces, right? Because it's got to be on the surface, because it must have just been put down on there yesterday. And I'm looking around at all the surfaces, and I'm not finding anything. I'm like, okay, looking every place I could have been, would have been, might have dropped it. Then I'm like, but it was this morning. It was 4 a.m. I'm not working. I'm working in this facility. This is my shop, and I'm doing it again. I'm just doing the circuit, trying to figure out where I was and where I could have been. And then I'm digging deeper. I'm like, okay, where's the ridiculous place you dropped it, right? Like the drawer that has that in it, right? That's like that you might have looked in it, maybe not. And I'm like, what is all this? What is the significance of this event, right? And I said, it's telling you to look at your life very closely to figure out something which we haven't figured out yet. And the keys will appear as soon as you've looked enough. Does that make sense?
It does. Do you have a background in hypnotic storytelling? Because I don't know if you realize that you embedded a few things in that story.
I do have I have a history of training in hypnosis. And it's
all right.
I was not intending to do that, but it's like,
it snuck in.
Go ahead.
It snuck in. That's the unconscious competence.
It's beautiful, man. I appreciate you bringing that up, because it's I think it's incremental, or it's a component of all human interactions. We hypnotize each other because it's like I got to induce in you some kind of a thought process and I use in these words that are just projections of vocal. That's funny. It's like I think about it because I deal with Steve Richards and Young to Live By guys, right? And it's like the fact that I can't think of the word right now is significant to something that I don't quite understand, and I better keep my feelers out, right? So, but it's like all of it is inducing some kind of thought process using these vibrations in the air. It's interesting. I'm very fascinated by all this. I'm like, and it's like probably it's like you try to hope you're not too weird. You know what I mean?
Oh, I'm already too weird, so but that's okay. I've found a world that supports my weird.
That's it. You know, it's like this. It's like the this is an interesting function. So I studied Hebrew language, oddly. I studied for 3 years what happened to America, end up points at the Bible, and then I studied the ancient Hebrew. I'm like, whoa, in a million years, I never would have predicted this result from this circuitous path to get there, right? And the first word of the Bible says everything I think I need to know, which is, the word is translated as Genesis in English, okay? And in Greek, I think they translate as tekne logos. I haven't really studied it because I'm not very good at Greek yet, but I've studied a little bit. But it's like, in the Hebrew, it's brashit, okay? So it is to imagine or to make, and shit is conversation, discourse, also translated as bush, which was the fascinating thing to me. So, because I became interested in the Hebrew language to try to study the bush and the symbol, literary symbol of the bush. And it's like, the bush is the direct intervention of God in the affairs of men materially, right? So providence. And I said, then I translated back from Hebrew shit into English again, and it said bush, thicket, and discourse. And that just about knocked me off my chair. But just when I heard it was that the word was shit, I'm like, you're kidding me, right? So, but the premise in my mind goes like this, is like, the universe is conscious, and we are interacting with it in a generative sense. And it generates a field that attracts the things that are good for us and repels the things that are bad for us and projects us forward into the future. And it's like, it goes with this model that Steve Richards working with the Jung to Live By guys, which is the biopsychosocial model, which is what I'm interested in. And I was working on some parallel track, just right, same path. And I found those guys. So tell me what you do.
Yeah, I know. I was about to start interviewing you, and I was like, Young to Live By, what's that all about?
You don't know those guys. Okay.
See, I know Young, and I know some stuff in the hypnosis world, but I don't know this particular application of his work. Okay, so I will elucidate for you. Since it sounds like you're interviewing me, and I'm like, okay, then I'll find out what you do, man. This is someone who does documentary filmmaking, and I've already flipped the interview process. So I promise I'll tell you my story eventually. But I am curious about this. That's good. So the issue is the Jung to Live By guy. So Steve Richards he's an interesting character. He's about in his 60s. He was very early, precocious young fellow, became interested in Carl Jung. And then he became, he was a student of Chinese martial arts with Chinatown in Liverpool, I believe. Okay, and he became a police officer after that. And he started in the early 70s. That's my understanding, okay? And police officer then he became a psychotherapist like that. And so now he's a film writer and he's working on this IPSA or International. I might have corresponded with him, but I don't know this aspect. Go ahead. He's making an International Psychosocial Association or something like that. Psychosystems Analysis Organization. That's the proper term. It's International Psychosystems Analysis, which is the kind of brand of his psychotherapy function, right? And so he's making an international organization. And then I linked up with them because I was just looking around on the web, and I'm like, okay, I was interested. I was watching the Boyos, right? They're talking about Nietzsche and Jung, and I'm like, these guys are all right. They're young fellas, and they're very energetic and kind of full of vim and vinegar is the nice way to say it, I guess. And I'm like, those guys are all right. And I just started following them, and then they split off. And James Dowling, who works with John Jeffrey, or Jouffre, I believe is the proper terminology, but I don't speak French, right? And I'm like, those guys are working together, and they were working with Steve. And I'm like, okay, so they made this Jung to Live By thing, which is like popularization and a training method to
create more people in this school of thought. So anyway, long story short, and I apologize for being
it's all good. This is a podcast. We're here to talk.
I guess so. The fellows are interested in developing an international body, and I'm like, I can be the United States guy, and so I'm the United States guy for this organization, training people how to help people be better at being themselves. And I'm like, that's perfectly right on the money. And it's like I say, we were on parallel tracks, and it's like, these people they're me, okay? They're just me doing the exact same thing. So we're like on the exact same path, and I'm like, how can I help, right? That's what I'm up to, and so I will support them in any way, shape, or form I can, and I don't expect any benefit to come to me, but for the association. Does that make sense?
Yeah.
So that's the story there, and it's like, so I help them. I participate in seminars, and I gladly have been learning a lot about this Jungian psychotherapy function and enjoying it a lot. And it's quite. I'm a physician. I'm an osteopathic physician here in Arizona, and my interest is in this holistic way of looking at people to try to make their lives better and improve their lives for their futures and for the posterity to follow. Okay. And so it's like, that's the systems I'm interested in integrating. And it's like, these guys are doing the exact same thing on a more limited basis because it's psychotherapy, but their model is within the entirety of human experience. So I'm like, these guys are right on the money.
Cool. So it sounds like it's a very practical application of Jung's work in terms of improving your life.
It's interesting because he told a story that I was just utterly stunned by, and it was on his podcast or the YouTube. They made a YouTube, and it was they treated it. Steve treated a fellow who was an Irishman, an elderly fellow who had total body psoriasis. He saw him 3 times, and he's like, the third time he hypnotized the guy, and in the hypnosis state, the gentleman went into a bar, met the barmaid, who was on a TV show that had some barmaid of similar character. And the barmaid said, you need to go talk to this gentleman at that table right there. Okay. And the gentleman happened to be the man's deceased father. And so he sat and had in the pub with the man, the deceased father, and had a conversation. And thereafter, the total body psoriasis resolved. And I'm like, whoa. It's like, okay, what's that mean? That, like, this, we're interested in the transduction of information from spiritual to material, or material to spiritual. And it's like the way that it works is beyond our comprehension, like logically. Does that make sense?
It does. I've heard of a lot of people having that experience where a physical problem changes after they deal with the emotional root or the spiritual root or whatever part of them is causing the problem. So I'm familiar with that.
Yeah, and it's like
that idea.
To me, it blew my mind because I'm like, okay, it expanded my understanding of the potentials involved. And I'm like, there's a guy named Rossi, and I don't remember his first name, and I apologize for that, in California, who's a Ericksonian psychologist who does this. He talks about the transduction from this, all the layers. And I'm like, that's what's interesting, is information transfer. So that's why, so when I lose my keys, I'm like, what is the significance of this? What is the universe trying to tell me? Because I kind of divide the world up in 2 parts, okay? So there's the part that I call me, the ego and all the parts of me that I would call me. And then there's everything else, okay? And everything else is unconscious to me, right? So it's like, there's information coming from the unconscious to me. And it's like, what does it mean when I lose my key, right? What is the information trying to propose to my brain, right? And it was fascinating because I learned a lot, even though, it's like this frantic state for a second, then I calmed down. And then I'm like, just started looking for what is the significance of this? And then it taught me about what my life is like right now. And so it's like, and then I found my keys. And I'm like, I didn't expect to find them so fast.
So once you got the lesson, the situation changed. Or
that's right. It's like the premise in my mind was this, is like, I said to myself, I said, look, the universe is trying to tell me something. And it's up to me to go, okay, what are you trying to tell me? And so then what happened is I started paying attention to what I was doing and how it was working, and the thoughts and emotions or whatever was going on in my head. And I slowed it down and I kept on doing it. And I said, and then I came to this conclusion. I said, as soon as I've done what is necessary, the keys will just appear randomly. And they did. And they were in my car, and I looked at my car twice, but they were in between the jamb of the driver's side door and the seat. You know what I mean? And I just opened the door, and there they are. I'm like,
right.
How about that? And it's like, everything is so, I think Jung would call it a synchronicity, right? It's like,
I am a big fan of the concept of synchronicity.
It's perfect, man. I'm like this. It's like, it's just a beautiful thing, you know, and it's like at this, if you go, the world is rubbing my fur the wrong way today, right? What's the purpose of this transmission, right? And if you do that, then it's like, it's irritating and motivating at the same time, or somehow there's information trying to get into your head, right? And it's like, just let the information get in your head so it can not be so irritating.
So I'm curious what you think the information or the purpose of this particular synchronous meeting is. What is it that I can do to bring greater awareness to your reality?
That's quite interesting. So this is interesting. So one of the things, greater awareness to my reality. Your participation brings greater awareness to other people. Does that make sense?
It does.
My understanding of this is, so that there's a symbol, and I draw it right here, which is a circle inscribed in a square, inscribed in a triangle, inscribed in a circle, okay? Oops, that's close. There's a picture of it right there, roughly.
I'm familiar with that symbol.
And that is the symbol of the Philosopher's Stone, right? And the Philosopher's Stone is interesting. I've been studying alchemy a little bit. I will go into that a little bit more because it's been amusing to me. I'm like, and it's strangely illuminating at the same time. I'm like, okay, the information comes in and you go, I didn't expect to learn that. But the Philosopher's Stone is supposed to be universally soluble. So it dissolves into any media, okay? Which is, you're a filmmaker because I know by your email address, right? I'm like, why? I can read between the lines, right? It dissolves into any media, and it's like the red Philosopher's Stone is to be powdered and dissolve in the media, and it will produce gold out of the base metals. Okay, and so that's the symbol I seek for what I'm trying to do, because I'm trying to turn things that think that they're something into something that is radiant. Okay. My goal of what I'm trying to do is to, I'm trying to increase the awareness of the potential of a human being to influence their own life in a positive way through the nature of their generative function that they have with their communication with the rest of the world. And that's what my goal is. And it's like this. And the fact that you're sitting here and talking to me and still being pleasant and stuff, that's cool, man. It's good.
I've had stranger conversations, so don't worry. This is the air that I breathe.
That's good, and I like this. So I'm interested in I'm generating this, and I'm interested in developing a system to help people do that, and referral networks, and get people positively motivated and moving in the direction that's going to achieve better positive results for them in their lives. And it's like, it's interesting because to me, there's an ethical component to this. And it's like the ethical component is the interesting part, because it's like, there's a right way and there's a wrong way to do this, right? And it's like, okay. And the universe will rub you the wrong way when you do it the wrong way. So it's like, it's all okay. And it's okay if you get rubbed the wrong way. And as long as you're learning, because it's like karma works like this. Karma will keep slapping you in the face because you keep making the same mistake over and over. And it's like, okay, you need to try again and learn the lesson until you figure out how to do the thing that makes you something different, right? That is positive. And so then it's like getting rid of the negativity, I think, is the game. And it's like, so one of the things I'm working on, and it's like, I'm working with these fellas, the Logos Productions, right? And their job is to make me into some kind of internet phenomena, which I do not understand, okay? And I do not wish to understand. I'm a simple man, right? And I'm like, okay, well, what's that mean? I don't care. I don't care. That's their job, okay? And it's like, their job is to generate interest. And it's like, among the things that I am doing, I'm attempting to create a online telemedicine service that is cash only and much less expensive than you can get through the insurance companies. Because I find that the interference that is imposed between the doctor and the patient to be just infernal. And I'm like not tolerating it. And so I expect a lot of attention to be garnered by that. And I also expect negative attention to be garnered by that, by the powers that be, because it's like you're busting the union rules and you're outside of control. So therefore you're not acceptable, right? And so it's like, it's quite an interesting game that is afoot here. And I'm like, my goal is to just create some systems that support me and help people support themselves in this environment. That's kind of the ultimate scheme of it.
I like that.
I appreciate that. I thank you, sir. And it's like I did this thing. I was a private practice physician for probably 12, 13 years. And what happened was we beat our heads bloody on the wall. And it's like what the wall was is the powers that be don't want you to be a private practice physician. And it's just like this, you try to worm your way through the hole. It's just not going to happen. There's no escape for that idea in the system. It's ironclad. And so we eventually, about 15 months ago, my partner and I sold out to the hospital, and now we belong to the hospital as employees. And it's like, okay. And it's like, all of a sudden, everything became easy. Okay. And in the process of this is how I got into telemedicine. I was like, I was trying to generate resources for our company to stay alive. So I started doing telemedicine, and I gave all the money to the company and keep one nickel. Okay. And I'm like, this is interesting, because it's like this weird exercise that this is when I started studying what happened to America. It's about 3 years ago. And it's like, I'm working long hours, nobody's in the office, and I just started reading everything that I thought was interesting without regard to how ridiculous, conspiracy minded, or whatever it is that everybody would impair your, or cause you to have, influence you to not do the thing, right? So I just said, whatever's interesting, I'll read the thing and I'll just follow the rabbit, right? And so I followed the rabbit, and I came to some ridiculous conclusions. I wrote a 200-page book, which hasn't been published because it's crazy, Bill. And I'm like, and then I had to stop writing because I started learning too fast, okay? And I'm like, okay, so that's cool. And that's how I end up studying the Hebrew. And I mean, it's crazy, Bill. And I'm like, okay. But the bottom line is what I did was during that time, I was also do this. I'd go visit the patient online. And then whenever they gave me a chance, I'd do 10 squats, okay? Because I have a bad back. And I'm like, okay, so I have a bad back. And I'm like, I can't do a squat, it hurts. And I'm like, well then, figure it out. So over the 3 years, I figured out how to do a squat. And it was like, that's no small feat. And I've been working on my back for 30 years. And I was able to do a squat. And I was like, that was an impressive feat to me. And how ridiculous that might sound, or must certainly sound. How about that?
I mean, I've had back issues before, so I get it. I've definitely made huge progress on those too.
You know, so and then that's about when Jordan Peterson came out, okay? So Jordan Peterson comes out and he's like this, and someone asked him, do you believe in God? And he's like, I hate that question. I said, that's interesting because I hate that question too. And it's like, he said his answer, and his answer was good. He said, I try to behave as though I believe in a God that is listening and cares and can act in my world. And I'm like, what does that mean? Right? And I said, must mean he prays. Right? So then I'm like, dude, I'm going to do an experiment because I'm not a religious man really, but I'm like this. I'm like, well, I'm going to start praying. And I started doing it. And I started praying for two things. I said, I'm going to pray to be straight and true. And that's all. And if I can manage that, then about anything's possible, right? Because I'm like, I don't know how crooked I've been, but it's like, just help me fix my back and you know what I mean? So I did this and I started doing that in addition to doing the squats and taking care of the people. And it's like this. My acceleration of progress advanced hugely. And I'm like, success story, what's that mean? That's the right answer. Even if it sounds stupid, it sounds like it's nothing, but I've come to the conclusion that from a Jungian perspective, it's like this, you're talking to the unconscious. Some people will call it the unconscious. Some people will call it God. And it's the same thing in my mind. It's like you're two words talking about the same thing. And that's interesting. And so it's like that's the the interesting function that has occurred to me very recently, which is the Jung said this thing in 1941. He wrote a lecture in Geneva, Switzerland. He's in the middle of World War II, just raging all around. And he said, the answer to the mass man is individuation. Okay, so the mass man is a communist and a Nazi. And they're just crazy people that are controlled by their passions, ideologically possessed, right? And it's like individuation is the answer. And I'm like, that's the same answer that Jesus Christ himself said when he was walking the earth. And I'm like, that's how I see it. It's no different. It's just like this. It's like, yeah, don't try to follow these crazy demons. This is demons because they're human creations, D-A-E-M-O-N, right? It's like ideological possession is what you should avoid. And that's kind of where I'm at. I'm like, so how do we help people get free and move forward and positively influence their lives and their neighborhoods and their people around them? That's the interesting bit.
What does individuation mean in that context?
Oh, I would say this. I would say individuation is the act or art of becoming better at being yourself. Which is to say, it's impossible for me to tell you how to individuate, right? But it's like, it's to cause you to be at the greatest harmony inside your experience as you can be, right? So that your fur's not getting rubbed the wrong way because you've harmonized the potentials all around you, and that's the right answer. And what does that mean? Well, every individual has to figure it out for themselves because it's like, no two of us are the same, right? And we are similar, but it's like, you know, the madness of being equal is like, okay, that's never going to happen, right? So it's like this. It's like for me to help you be, you know, to individuate will be like this. It's like to help you understand when the negative forces that you're running into have to do with something you're doing. You're attracting that energy. And how do you change the expressions that you're putting out to make it so that it stops doing it? Because it's just not around you anymore. So that's kind of how I see that individuation. Like the things you do, the habits that you engage in, and the communication you're putting out into the rest of the world.
So where do you want to go from here? I don't have I mean, I could ask you questions about this for the remainder of the time, but I figure that we...
So tell me about what you do. I'm quite curious.
How much do you know already?
I don't know anything, man. He's like, hey,
anything at all.
Meet this guy. Okay. I trust these fellows. I have like this. It's like this. I'm like a blind man. They just hold my hand and try to, like, I don't want to know what they do. They do this social media thing. Like, They said, "Hey, talk to this guy. We'll be so excited to see what happened." I'm like,
up. Okay. All right.
So what do you do?
So I'm probably best known for a documentary I made called American Circumcision, which looks at the modern debate around circumcision and the growing movement that says that men should be able to make their own choices about their bodies. So it is looking at the modern debate around that, looking at it as a human rights issue. It gets into the issues of it around sexuality and consent, early life trauma, the social impact, all sorts of stuff like that. And since then, I did a book on activism, because a lot of people after seeing the film asked me, what can I do to make a difference? Right. So I wrote a book called the Intactivist Guidebook, which, by the way, the activists who are working on this are known as Intactivists, which is intact plus activist.
Sure.
And so the book is exploring the question of basically how you do activism. And so I was actually really curious about that question after doing the film, and did a lot of research and thinking basically about, well, how do you actually create social change? Because I think most people have this idea that you just share the message and you tell people about your issue and that's it. And there's actually a lot more to it than that. And now I'm writing another book, which is a whole other topic that I don't know if I'm ready to get into yet. So that's probably the main thing to talk about, or my focus.
That's quite interesting. So you studied activism. Now you know how to be an activist, right?
I mean, yes and no. I feel like, well, actually, no, that's not true. It's a yes, but it's one of those things where now I can see so much more that I don't know, that I have that imposter syndrome that people who actually know something sometimes have. So yes, but it's the difficult thing that I found is that it is something that's only possible in collaboration. So there's only so much that you can do as an individual. I think that's where people get caught. They go, how do I make a difference? And the answer is you can make a difference, but doing it alone is very difficult. And doing it with a group or an organization is much easier, and a lot more gets done, which is why when you look at big, activist movements, they're movements. They're multiple people working together, all contributing around the same idea, right, all doing different things. And so, when you ask, like, do you know how to do that? It's a bit like asking, do you know how to be in relationship with others? And it's like, I do, but that's actually only possible with others,
Right. That's right. I like that. And it's the interesting function is, so you're it's like activist consciousness, right? And you're more activist conscious than I am, I suppose. And I'm like, that's okay. And I'm like, what? I would pick your brain on the subject, because it's like when you became activist conscious, do you see activists doing other things that are like, do you recognize activists that were otherwise previously hidden from you?
What do you mean previously hidden?
Like you just didn't recognize them because you didn't have enough knowledge in your head to go, oh, that's an activist over there doing something.
So I think the biggest thing is that when people look at movements or activism, they often only see the surface, not the underlying system behind it. So when people think of for example, the civil rights movement, they think of the big marches and speeches, and they think of, Martin Luther King's famous speech, for example, but they don't think about things like the activist school that some of those people trained at. So for example, Rosa Parks actually went to a school of activism that trained people on how to do their methods before she did the things that she became known for. And so when people try to mimic those movements, they often mimic the surface elements, but they don't mimic the underlying structure. And in the book, I kind of compare it to someone who really likes war movies, who would put on a uniform and go and stand around and march in it without ever actually doing basic training. If you want to actually take on that role, you also have to take on the work that goes into it. And a lot of that is not seen just in the final product. So it's the process that goes before it. And then the other thing that I think is relevant to what you've been talking about is that a lot of the difficulties that movements have are the result of inner problems that exist in individual members of the movement and collectively in the movement. So very often I see someone doing something to try to make an impact in the world that is coming in some way from their own shadow and their own unresolved issues or unhealed self, that if they were to fix or heal or be with that part of themselves first, it would make the external work so much easier. In other words, like the story that you began with, there's something that's showing up in their life, which includes, by the way, their activism or their opposition even, that is trying to draw their attention to something, and it keeps happening. And so as an activist, they're sometimes so focused on the problem, so focused on the thing they're trying to change, and they're going like, that out in the world needs to change, and they're not thinking, maybe this is trying to tell me that some part of me should change first. And that's always the hardest thing too, is that when I have looked at activism and looked at the larger problems in the world that I have struggled with, or that I'm concerned with, or that I'm trying to change, there's always a part of those problems that is mirrored in me, where I go, oh, I would be so much more effective at working on this if I did the work on myself, to not need that to teach me something, so to speak, or to be the kind of person for whom that wasn't triggering or challenging. So when you start like the external problem is in some way a portal into the inner problem, if that makes
100%,
sense.
100%. It's like, I talked to a nice lady today that was a patient of mine, and she told me that her sister was reading some I'm sure it's fringe-ish news reports kind of stuff about alleged actions by elites or something like this, and it was very disturbing to her. And it's like this, it's like, yeah, that's a problem. You need to, it shouldn't disturb you reading about what other people do, even if it's evil. Okay.
Well, it does. And I actually wrote some blog posts about that question, because I've been seeing, obviously, with everything going on in the world, a lot more what would be called conspiracy theories popping up across the internet. And it's always fascinating to me, the narrative that those conspiracies create, and then the response people choose to respond to them with. So there's this narrative that there's this evil group of people who are controlling the world, who have this super intelligent, very long-term plan that they've been working on for a long time to get even more control, even though they already have all the control. And when you listen to conspiracy theorists respond to that, they say, okay, well, the solution is that we need to share that information and post on Facebook all day about it. It's like,
obsessive.
How'd you get to that? Like, if they achieved this through this really calm, long-term, intelligent thinking, where they worked in collaboration with other highly intelligent people who are on the same wavelength. It seems to me, if you wanted to defeat that, you would have to develop a long-term plan, which you worked on studiously over maybe even many generations with other people who were in collaboration and had on a similar wavelength, not, put yourself in an adrenal state where you're constantly worried and posting on social media all day.
That's perfect. That's exactly right. Which is to say, it's communication. So back to that original thing, which is what are you doing to generate the response you want to see, right? And you should be calm about it and be ready to invest. That's like, you be ready to invest and be calm about that too. You're everything you got. Because it's like, well, that's how it goes. It's like this, what is it that you're generating, and the effect you wish to see in the world, right? And why would you get into you call it an adrenal state? I like that. It's hypersympathetic, like,
yeah,
man, it'll kill you. That'll kill you. That state is pathological. You can't do it for very long. You're not designed to do that. You're designed for something else. So you're like, okay, that's the wrong answer to the world. And those people, they burn out because it's like, body can't do it.
Well, it's challenging too, because a lot of the time, the problem the activist is facing is one that might naturally put you in that state. Like, I totally understand why someone would see injustice in the world, especially injustice that was done to them and affects them personally, and get upset about that, because in some way, that's the correct reaction of any normal human, right? That there's injustice and we should be upset about it. But the challenge is that solving it cannot come from the consciousness that created it or the consciousness that it's naturally creating.
Right.
In other words, if the problem is here, you have to somehow get your consciousness above it.
I said transcendence. I agree. So you transcend it, and then you can resolve it in a different way than is like obvious at this level, right? There's a three-dimensional problem here, and it's like change the dimensionality, and then it dissipate the problem. So we're in agreement there, and it's like it's a tricky thing, because it is like you have, and it, like I say, points back to the Christianity, which is like this. It's like, ignore the slings and the arrows, man. They get to do that. It's okay. That's not hurting. You know what I mean? It's like there's all kind of indignities that can be imposed, and it's like, ignore that and transcend it and be loving to the whatever it is, and you'll achieve the solution to this problem. Right? And so the fear that I have is the activists that are aggressive and militant, as opposed to the ones that are loving and you know what I mean? It's a different function.
Yeah, I understand. Let me ask specifically, what's the fear? What is the fear with someone who's militant?
It goes like this. It's like the way I said it before in this little discussion we're having is the fear is that fear, maybe not the right word, but it's like the concern is that there is a subset who believe that the negativity, which is to say militant activity, must be imposed to forcibly cause the change they wish to see in the world. And it's like, I'm concerned about such militancy. It's a revolutionary behavior, you know what I mean? And it's like, I'm very, very, very concerned about revolutionaries. It's like, that's dangerous. It's because you don't know what you're going to get when you start opening hostilities of such a nature. And it's like,
so
go ahead.
What specifically is the fear? Because I actually don't know that I feel the same fear towards people who are really militant about a particular issue or cause.
I'm not going to say fear. Like I said concern. It's like, okay. It's like, that's good. It's okay. But it's like when you're willing to crack heads, well, then we have something else to talk about, right?
So is the concern that they would steamroll or push their ideology on you? Is that what it is?
The concern is that we will come into conflict in a physical way. And I'm not concerned that they're going to overwhelm me, because I will defeat my enemies, right? I have no concern of being defeated, but I have no interest in engaging in a physical contest, right? That's the issue. And it's like I wish to avoid that. And I had a very difficult conversation with a friend of mine who I regard as ideologically possessed, who's a revolutionary. And I said, my concern here is that you're going to end up in the other trench. I really would like to avoid that. And it's like, that is not interesting to me. And it's
so
like,
it sounds like the concern is that their behavior will force you into a situation that you don't want to be in. And you might be able to handle yourself well in that situation, but you don't want to be in that situation.
That's correct. That's correct. It's like you're necessitating. It's like inducing a state that I wish not to be induced into. Okay, which is to say, fight, flight. Right? Don't do it. I wish you to not do that. That would be bad. I really don't want to do that. And it's like it's okay if you do it, and I'm ready to deal with it, okay? But it's like, it's the suboptimal outcome here, right? Because I think that it's not a civil outcome. I'm a civil man. I want to engage in a civil communication and discourse, and then reasonably come to a conclusion that both of us can live with as reasonable people in a civil society. But it's like the revolutionaries are militants, and they're not allowing that. And I see a lot of this recently in the youth culture and coming out of the college campuses, which is anti-free speech. It's like, my goodness, you want to be militants, do you? You don't know what you're asking for, so stop it.
Right.
Please, because it's the response will not be civil. Okay.
Oh man, we might end up okay. So the book I'm working on now deals
with the secret book.
This, yeah, it's not. I mean, it's not a huge secret, but it's looking at some of those ideas, which I think what you're referring to is probably social justice based in critical theory. So, yeah. So that's what the book I'm working on is about, is looking at what those ideas mean when applied to the issue that my work is focused on, which is circumcision. Because
I want to talk about that for a minute as a doctor, right?
Sure.
I've seen them do them. I'm like, what a crazy damn thing that is. Like,
yeah.
I have no interest in ever doing any of that. That is the craziest procedure ever. I'm like, whoa. And it's like, okay. I don't know what to say about that. And I'm very interested in that work, but I'm like, what a crazy thing that is. Okay.
I mean, that's what the focus of my film and stuff has been. And a lot of the activists I talked to became activists because they saw the procedure and had a similar reaction to you of thinking this does not seem normal or like
I'm
something.
wrapping my head around that craziness, man. That seems crazy, right?
Yeah.
So but the activism thing, and then the in the context of this, I regard it as it's like what happened to America. Like I say, after 3 years, I figured it out. I was saying I was still studying it. I'm not. I already know the answer. Okay. It's psycho-spiritual warfare is how I see it. And it's like, what's that mean? I believe there's a possessing spirit that wishes to take possession of everything that exists. Okay, and that spirit is operating through various agencies that are human, and it is they're my mortal enemy, right? And it's like, that's okay, but it's like this ideological possession is part of that. Okay, and so the revolutionary militants are ideologically possessed. They appear to be part of that too. And it's like, so my studies right now are like. Like I said, I didn't anticipate this, coming interested in the Jungian psychology and the spiritual element of it was unexpected when I began studying what happened to America. And so it's like this, how do I help you be better at being yourself? That makes me happy, right? Because it's like this, you're going to do this crazy thing and generate this outcome. And it's like, I'm interested in seeing that, right? And so it's like, how do I support that and help people do their thing and help them get where they think they need to be, as long as it's on ethical lines? I'm like, I can deal with that. But it's like when I question the ethics, I'm like, hands off, I'm not doing it, right? So there's a discriminating capacitor inside my consciousness that I'm going to use to decide who I generate positive results with, right? Because I don't really believe in negative results. All results are positive, although we don't have to understand the outcome, how it's positive, right? So the revolutionary is doing some positive thing, but I don't understand it and I don't want to participate in it. It seems unethical to me. That's kind of how I see it.
And it seems unethical to you because you feel like it's using force instead of dialogue.
That's interesting. It's like here's the trick. So it's like my dad was talking about I was talking to him about the 1871 treaty with the Sioux Indians, right? And I said it was illegally abrogated by the United States when they stole the land from the Indians. And he goes, what would you do? Give it back? And I had to think about it. I'm like, wow, yeah, give it back if you want to. And I'm like, I don't what? That's what you do. It's like you're be true to your word, right? And it's like, and you don't have to like the outcome of being true to your word, right? Because it's like, what does that mean? I don't know what it means, but it's like, yeah, because it's like I thought about that with my dad. I'm like, I know how to deal with guys like you when you sign treaties, right? If that's how you're going to play, I know how to deal with you. And it's like, so the revolutionaries they're like, so these social justice types, they change the meanings of words. So there's no dialogue possible.
So I used to feel that way.
Oh, whoa, I didn't expect that. Then what?
I know. I did. I used to feel that way. And I think that, so that a lot of the ideas of what we're talking about have obviously been adopted by large organizations and corporations and governments. So one of the things I did is I started reading basically everything I could from that perspective. And I started to understand why they do what they do. And in some way, you know, I like what you're saying about using dialogue over force. And part of when I tune into that, there's also a part of me that thinks, well, if we're going to choose dialogue over force, then we actually have to be willing to dialogue and actually engage with those ideas, right?
Yeah.
And to try to understand them on their own terms. And this is something that I actually see with doctors too on the intactivist issue. So they'll say, well, we don't like how there's some, you know, activists who we feel like are mean to doctors or saying mean things about them, or are a little too aggressive with their activism. And at the same time, they refuse to dialogue, right? When people have tried to, you know, actually I tried to buy an ad at one of the big doctors conventions and they would not take my money, right? And so they've done similar things too, where there used to be activists who would get a booth inside doctors conventions. And so as they've been marginalized, as they've been told, you're not allowed to speak, we're not going to listen to you, we won't engage in dialogue, people get louder because, well, dialogue is not an option, then we have to.
That's how it goes. That's how it goes, brother. That's how it goes.
But I think that there is the possibility for some dialogue on social justice issues. And so one of the things that I'm getting into in my book is that there actually is a reason that certain words get redefined. So a lot of modern social justice thinking is based in what's known as critical theory. And critical theory is a philosophical movement, if you will, created in the 1960s that was really concerned with language and how language creates systems of power. So, for example, if you want to talk about the issue of circumcision, the language that the dominant culture gives is circumcised and uncircumcised. And that language assumes circumcision as a norm, right? And that people who are intact or have the body they were born with are in some way abnormal. But you wouldn't use that language on a woman's body. You wouldn't say that a normal woman is unmastectomied, right? You'd say she's normal, whole, natural. So intactivists call men who still have their foreskin intact. And so there's a way in which they changed the word because they actually couldn't have the conversation about the intact body unless they use the word intact. And so what I think activists on social justice issues are doing is something similar, where they feel like the existing words don't articulate what they're trying to say. And there's actually a whole school of thought in critical theory about what they call epistemic injustice, which is basically the idea that certain forms of truth are privileged over others. And in something, there's something called hermeneutical injustice. And hermeneutical injustice, I know these are academic words that people came up with in academic journals and decided to use as many syllables as possible. But hermeneutical injustice is the idea that if you don't have the words to describe your experience, that's actually a form of injustice. So if you were a black person living in the Jim Crow South many years ago, and you didn't have the word racism to describe your experience, it'd be really hard to talk to people about that experience, right? So you actually need that word to talk about it. And so a lot of what they're doing, and the reason that their jargon is often so complex, I know, you facepalm when you hear a word like hermeneutical injustice, like what in the world is this, But it's because they feel like the existing words don't capture their experiences, so you have to create something. And so when you start getting into, it is like a whole new language when you start reading it, but there is communication happening. But it's also like the language itself has this questioning of language in it and assuming everything is creating, a system of power, and it gets very complex. It is the kind of thing that most people don't have time to figure it all out.
I respect your ability to stomach it, okay? Which is like, to study it at all. I'm like, I've read about the Marxists, and it really just turns my stomach. And I'm like, okay, I just do that one to you. And I'm like, it's all good. The issue I have, though, is it's a power grab, okay?
It is, but the whole philosophy is about power dynamics and exploring those.
I understand. It's very simple and straightforward. It's like this: we want more power. And by any means, and I'll make the words up if I need to, and that's okay. I respect that in its boldness, which is like this. The problem that I have is that makes Mao correct. Power springs from the barrel of a gun, and that's the bottom line.
Oh, but that's actually not what they would say. And by the way, I'm speaking for them. My personal philosophy is slightly different.
Anything to you, I'm not. Just so
we're on the
same page.
I do think there are some good ideas in there, but so their philosophy is actually that power comes from language, and that the language you use actually contains systems of power in it.
Okay, this goes to this Babylonian philosophy that I discovered after I started studying the biblical Hebrew, which was unexpected, right? So Babylon is controlled by two groups of magic users, okay? There's magi who do good things to help good people get good things and prevent bad things from happening to good people. And those are the magi or the wise men of the East in the Nativity story, okay? There's also sorcerers. And sorcerers have an entirely different job. And their job is to summon demons and control them through their superior knowledge of evil. And the purpose is, a demon in this construct is an ideological creation for the purpose of inspiring the emotionality of the masses, who are then enthralled and go in the direction you want them to go. And I'm like, that's what these people are doing.
So is there a good version of magic in this system? Or is it all?
The magi are the good version of magic.
And what makes them good?
They try to prevent bad things from happening to good people, and they help good things happen to good people.
See, they would say that they're the good ones. They're trying to stop, racism and homophobia. And
of course they would say that. They're powerful, right? Their lies are to be understood as what they are, right? It's like this. It's like, I'm a racist, but I redefine racism so that you're the racist all the time and can never be a not racist. There's no redemption possible, and I will change the rules anytime I see fit to cause your emotionality to be adjusted appropriately to cause you to be demoralized and me to win. How hard was this? And it's like, that's how I see this. And it's like, whoa, I'm like probably on the third rail on this one. I'd like apologize.
You know what it sounds like is bothering you, and this is something I talk about in my book, is that they're playing a zero-sum game. So ideally, you want to look for what's called win-win scenarios. So like us doing this podcast is a win-win because I'm getting to talk to your audience and you're getting content for your podcast, and we're learning by talking to each other. So it's not like one of us wins and one of us loses.
That's right.
Whereas if you were playing something like chess or doing a boxing match or something, there'd be a winner and a loser. But those, of course, are games that you enter into consensually. So even if you're doing something like that, there might still be a hidden win-win if that you're both playing a game and you're enjoying that and learning something or having an athletic competition. But like a true win-lose game would be something like a mugging, where someone gets something from that and the other loses, and it's being forced on them. And so it sounds like what's bothering you is that the way the political conflict is set up, there's one person who gets to be right and one person who gets to be wrong, and one who wins and one who loses. And there's no room for you to say, well, is there a way we could both win and you could get your needs addressed and I could remain safe and get the things that I want?
No, that's not quite correct, but it's not far off. And it's like, my contention is this, is that the conflict that we face is the contest between individualism of the West and mass movements of Carol Quigley was a professor of history at Georgetown University School of Foreign Service, and he talked about it as Oriental despotism, which is to say slave armies. And so it's like this: people who are enthralled by emotional pleas to join a mass movement. Ideological possession is how Jung would talk about it, the masked man. The slave army is the enemy of the individual, because it's like they seek to control the individual because we wish to enslave everybody, because that's the goal. And so Carol Quigley talked about it like this. He said there's two questions. There's a question which invokes an answer in all people, and the answer is the theodicy of the person. And so the question is, given the fact that God is omnipotent, God is everywhere, and God can do anything and interferes in the ways of human beings, how do you explain the existence of evil? And there's two answers that come out. There's the existence of evil is the action of free will in the absence of God's ethics. That's the individualists, the people who believe in the good God, who went into Western Europe, and that's Western Europe is essentially a haven for those people. And then everybody else who says, God made the evil, he's responsible for it, and it's not my problem, right? And so it's like the way I see it, and when I talk about the two groups of people, the people who believe in the good God are trying to make themselves be better because they see themselves falling short. The other ones are like, well, God made me like this, and to hell with it, it's okay, right? But these are the ones that are governed by their passions. He says these two people, the Western people, the people who are predominantly of the belief in the good God that and the ethical standards tend to be governed by rule of law. The people who believe that God is responsible for all the evil of the world tend to be governed by what he called providential monarchs that always seek to conquer the entire world and always fail, because they see themselves as the vicar of God and they have no ethical standards to rely upon because they don't believe in such things. They just do whatever is expedient, which is the communists. You know, if I must be so plain to say it, it's like 60 or 100 million dead people is evidence of their ethics. And I leave it at that. That's where mass movements lead us. And so that's the conflict I see. So it's not so, it's more cut and dry than you appear to be admitting to, and I'm okay with that too, because it's just discourse.
Well, I'm curious why, because I do notice you are making it very cut, and there's like this sort of dichotomy, and it's a very dualistic, like there's this force and this force, and they're in conflict. But my understanding of Jungian stuff was often that it was actually more so shadow, conscious and unconscious, and that when you encountered something that was evil, it was usually a part of yourself you hadn't integrated.
Mao tells you how to integrate everything that's too oppositional, okay? And it's like that. It's like,
what does he say? I actually don't know.
Mao says power springs from the barrel of a gun.
So the idea is if you encounter opposition,
how do you handle the Nazis? It's not like you go negotiate with the sons of bitches, right? It's not going to happen. It's like this. It's like the you cannot negotiate with some people. They do not see it as worthy of their effort, and they wish to do something else entirely and by force. And it's like, those people are not to be negotiated with, and it's okay. But to presume that you get to dialogue with those people and come to some equitable solution is like, you're dreaming, man. I think that's a dream. I don't believe that it's likely to hold up. And so the conflict is, you know, how far it's like an ethical question. How far out on the limb are you willing to go for your belief in whatever it is, including the intactism, or, you know, does that make sense? Because I get it. And it's like, are you willing to go blow up a building? Or, you know what I mean? It's like, whoa, dude, or whoa, really? You know what I'm saying? And it's like, there's ethical limits, and it's like, what, you want to be civil about this? Are you willing to be militant? Right? And it's like, that's the distinction.
I'm going to reframe militant, because I think that someone who would do something like that is actually incredibly undisciplined and a disservice to their cause. And I would not want anyone to do something like that.
That's good.
So when I hear, because there's activists I know who do like some of the metaphors you talk about, of this idea we're in a spiritual war, or that they'll use metaphors of this being like a war on children, what's happening to them, or even in politics, people use the metaphor of a war of ideas, or a spiritual war between groups of people. And whenever I hear that, I always think about how actual wars are done. So when people talk about this being a war, the behavior I see that follows from that is that they want to charge out individually on the battlefield and start arguing with people or things like that. And the way that actual militaries work is that there's a structure of command, and there's a hierarchy, and there's discipline, and you don't just charge off and fight the enemy. You have to follow your commander's orders, and there's an organization. And there's some people who aren't even involved on the battlefield. They're manufacturing weapons at home, or they're recruiting people, or they're supplying food, because supply lines are a huge part of military warfare. So it seems to me that if you were actually militant, you wouldn't go off and do some stupid and immoral act of terrorism. Wow. You would be very disciplined and serious, and you would form relationships with the other people in your unit, and you would work together, and you would do things that you would know would actually contribute to the long-term success of your issue, which might not always be the flashiest things or the most impressive. Right. And you would train a lot, because anyone who's in the military is constantly training, and they're learning new skills, and they're working on themselves, and they're in peak physical condition. And similarly, if you're going to work on an activist issue, you need to be in peak mental condition, emotional, relational, and the kind of person who is working on themselves that much and is that committed to their ethical framework is not going to engage in the behaviors that you're talking about, where they would recklessly hurt others.
We're in agreement, okay? Those people are not useful to the people who would control them, okay?
But I think I'm doing the critical theory thing. If I'm redefining the word militant, I hope you notice. I'm changing its meaning.
But I was like this, I'm going to go.
What in hypnosis would be a reframe.
You're all right, man. It's like that. So I expect nothing less. This is where I get studying the alchemy, okay? This is quite interesting. And it's
alchemy, we're transforming it, right? We're taking this thing which
it's like this. So there's a fellow named Yuri Bezmenov. Have you heard of him?
Mm-mm.
Yuri Bezmenov, also known as David Schumann, is his alias. He's a Russian KGB agent who defected from the KGB in 1970 to Canada.
I think I may have seen this YouTube video, but go on.
No, he made a bunch of videos in the early 1980s talking about demoralization and what else would he call it? Subversion of a nation, okay? And it's like, it is, the interesting thing, he talks about how do you influence groups and cause things to happen the way that you want them to happen in a controlled fashion. And it's like this. He says, in any society, there's just motion. People are doing things, okay? And he's like, you find the one that's going the direction you want, and you pour money on him. And then he goes, and then you get a movement in that direction. And it's like, so it's like this. The ethical people in any movement are less useful than the ones that are crazy to somebody who has money that wants to create an impression of something that's different than what the average or what is ethical.
Why do you think that they're less useful?
It goes like this, because it's like this. It's Hegelian dialectic, right? It's like this. So we got, what is it? Thesis, antithesis, synthesis, right? So how do I want to control both ends so that I control the middle, right? So it's like this. So the bankers built the Nazis and they built the communists and they fought in Germany. And who wins? Who wins? No matter who wins, the bankers win, right? Because they control Germany by whatever, because they control both elements. That's how it works. So there's no need for any kind of civil function at all, because it's like our extremists will win and they'll be in totalitarian control, right?
So you're talking about, so it sounded like there were two different concepts in there. There was one of the idea of controlled opposition where you're playing both sides. And there was another of that if you are going to do that, you want to support people who you can, that this whatever group that is actually on top can manipulate. Is that what you're describing? And you think that an ethical activist is going to be harder to manipulate?
No, it's like this. It's like, no, that you're no good, because it's like an ethical guy is hard to control because you're going to do what you think is right. And that's not what I want you to do. I want you to do something that's in my interest, right? If I'm going to be in control of a situation. Does that make sense?
It does. It ascribes a very particular value system to donors. And many of the donors I've met have a different value system, and they would want someone who is committed, because the flip side of that is one of the movements I've read a little bit of the history of is the abolitionist movement. So the movement in America to end slavery. And in that, one of the pieces of the history that people don't know is there was someone named John Brown, who was a white man who tried to, quote unquote, liberate a plantation and ended up just shooting a bunch of people and failing at his task.
Right, let's clarify this a little bit. John Brown was trying to generate a slave rebellion in Virginia, West Virginia. It was West Virginia.
Yeah. And when you get into the history, there were some abolitionists who were bankrolling him, and they wanted him to do one task, and he ended up doing another. And the way that it played in the press at the time is the way that any mass shooting for a cause would play. Like this was, Frederick Douglass wrote at the time that this was like one of the worst things ever to happen to the movement, and that there was a fear that this would be used against them and hurt their cause. So I think that there's probably more danger for someone who wants to be influential on a cause in bankrolling people who would do things like that. And that they're probably safer bankrolling ethical people because ethical people don't do things like that.
I understand your point. And it's like, so Bezmenov talks about this in this fashion. It's like this. So the function in the vision that is presented by Yuri Bezmenov, which is available on YouTube, you can look him up and check him out. Anybody who's listening to this, is that the purpose, and this was spoken by Antonio Gramsci, 1937. He died as an Italian Marxist. He said the purpose, they wanted to create an infiltration in the institutions to generate what is called cultural hegemony. Cultural hegemony is the projection of the cultural preferences of the elites through the institutions into the general public. And he's postulated the concept of, which was later called the Long March Through the Institutions by Rudi Dutschke, a German socialist who died in the 70s. The issue is to have a they called it a war of position. And that's within the institutions, to gain authority within the institutions to generate what they call the cultural conditions necessary for the revolution. after which will be the war of maneuver with the reactionary forces. So we're anticipating a fight, physical fight, and we're just generating the cultural conditions necessary for the revolution. So it's like, so that's what I see when I look at the 70s and 1968, 69, the creation of the Weather Underground was that the attempt to instantiate that very revolution by such means. And it's like, okay, they just went back to the drawing board again. And so they're not after, they don't have to be after incremental change, like you say, the ethical dialogue pattern of activism would lead, right? So it's like, yeah, we're not interested in that. We want the power, and we're going to get the power, and it will be by violent means.
See, though, it's so interesting to me. Like, I see what you're saying, but and it's interesting to me that the reaction from people who oppose their ideology or have a different perspective, I feel like if someone has successfully marched through every institution and actually generated that kind of a movement, I would want to learn everything about how they did it. Because
I understand.
There's so much, like, there's obviously something to learn here. And even if you think that what they're doing that for is bad, you would still want to understand how they did it.
No question, you're correct. 100% correct.
That's one of the things I have found reading all of the activist literature is that I think that the characterization that it is as how do I put it? There is definitely a concern with power in there, but it's more complex than I think you might be describing, or more nuanced.
It's like this. It's like, I don't care what they say. I don't trust one word they say, because they don't care about any kind of communication except power, in my opinion. And it's like, the people that are useful in this circumstance are the ones that drive the polarization of the populace, because the purpose, it goes to Julius Caesar's.
But see, hold on, that was the mirror of them and you. That you're like, I don't trust what they say. There's no point in listening to them.
I know.
That's what they say about you.
I understand what you're saying. Now, I'm attempting to pick up a signal here, okay? And I am attempting to pick up their signal, and I'm recognizing some value in the signal that they are capitalizing upon. But I recognize the intention as to driving the division of the population for control of the population. That's what I see happening, which is, you know, in line with the Julius Caesar's work, which is, you know, how do you divide to conquer the Gaul, you know, like he did. And it's like, you create a mental division between the people, and you split them up. And it's like the ones that polarize are the extremists. They pull the rest out, and you defund these and you fund the extremes. Now you have a good internal conflict, and they're not paying attention to who's running the operations on the outside, right? Because if I make you hate your neighbor, you don't hate me. You and your neighbor can have a big fight, all sprinkled.
Right. You're describing a divide and conquer strategy.
That's right. That's right. And it's like, that's what I see happening. So I don't see them as being genuine in the fact that it's like, the people, I regard them to be led by cynical people or true believers that are, you get me? It's not like, I believe most people are simply misled and trying to go along and get along, and they want to fit in a social circumstance, and that's an entirely different function. But it's like, the problem I see is this is driving division and preventing people from having good conversations. And like I say, the extremists, I have no interest in talking to them, because they're crazy, and they're not interested in actual communication with language, because they see it all as just simply a power game. Because and they talk about it in this fashion, which is this is your logic is racist, right? Your mathematics is racist. I'm like, really? okay, you can say that. And I'm like, I'm pretty sure you're not interested in talking to me because you're not making any sense, even though it sounds like you're using English. And I don't think you are, right? And that's kind of how I see it. And it's like, it's okay. But I see a lot of people being misled and causing them to do self-destructive activities in the process that are destructive to the social environment. That's my concern.
So I'm curious, if you met someone who did want dialogue, what would change?
I would talk to them.
Instead?
I would be happy to talk to those people. And it's like, it's very interesting because it's like, I've got some people in my family that are more sympathetic to this viewpoint than I am. And I try to have a nice, reasonable conversation, knowing full well that there's a high emotionality right under the surface. And it's like trying not to tiptoe carefully through the tulips, right? And it's okay, but it's like the issue is this. It's like, I don't mind having a conversation with someone, but it's like the premise is that I honestly, the ideology is not individualistic at all. It's anti-individual. I have a problem with that. Which is
I could ask many more questions about that, but I'm not sure how far down that you're wanting to explore. Yeah.
No, it's just like this. It's like it's a group identity thing, and identity politics is what I'm complaining about. And like I say, I am not an adherent to that, and I don't anticipate ever being one. And yeah, it's antithetical to what I call Western civilization, I suppose. And it's like, that's okay. You don't have to like Western civilization. It's okay. There's other parts of the world. Just emigrate, okay? Just go do something somewhere else. But why do you gotta conquer this place? You know what I mean? Well, what is it about the people that don't agree with you that you need to conquer them? Does that make sense? Like squelch their individualism. That's what I'm objecting to, I suppose, in the strongest way.
I'm trying to figure out where, because there's a lot that we could explore there. I'm not sure which direction you'd want to go with it.
I don't know. I'm not really looking to go in any particular direction. I'm just kind of like free-forming here with you, right? And it's like, it's okay. Since we haven't ever met before, the audience doesn't know that. And it's like, okay, this is the first time we ever talk to each other. That's like,
it's true.
How exciting, right? It's like kind of open a new can of worms and see what pops out, right? And it's okay.
Yeah, I see both those perspectives, and this is I think this is probably the thing that has made the film that I made something that people can watch and get multiple different perspectives from, and that issue is interesting to see in light of both of the things we're talking about, because it is a case where people are born a particular way and then have a cultural group identity imposed on them through surgery.
Oh yeah.
And it is,
That's quite interesting. It is an ethical question, and it's like, wow. And I'm totally empathetic to the position. I get it, and it's like I say, having witnessed the procedure and going, that's weird, that's mighty strange, and it's like, what is the significance of this, and what is the appropriate relationship we should have towards this? It's interesting. And it's like, we're touching crazy third rails here, but it's like, in with relation to circumcision, it's like the next rail over is abortion. It's like, wow, okay, you know what I mean? It's like, I don't know. I don't even want to touch on it. Besides even mentioning it, it's probably dangerous enough.
People compare those issues sometimes, but I see them as different in the sense that abortion is a debate over whether or not something is a life. But everyone agrees once the child is born and the parents are raising the child that it's a human being with rights, right?
I don't agree with that, but I understand your point.
Yeah.
I would say some people would argue the point.
Which part?
That it's after you're born,
that they would say that life doesn't begin at birth.
There are those that say there's no rights. What are you talking about? Okay.
Yeah, that's a whole other discussion.
I just had to say it. It's just as a point. So not everyone will agree to that, perhaps. But it is, yeah, it is a ethical question, right? And that's kind of how I look at it. It's like, okay, so I'm trying to work within an ethical framework that is predictable and reliable, and then useful in that way, so that now when you interact with me, you understand what you're dealing with, and I'm not going to give you something obtuse. And you know what I mean? I'm not going to change the definition of any words. I'm just going to be square with you and try to work with you, and so it's predictable. Now we can have a way to relate to one another, and predictably so, and we can function together in our society.
Push back a little on that though, because we do have unique definitions for words. Like, what do you mean? We have this word called synchronicity. It didn't exist until Carl Jung created it.
Okay.
And we created it because it describes a very particular experience, and we couldn't talk about that experience without the word synchronicity. Like, that actually is a word that we made up, that we changed the definition of.
Well, how do we change the definition of it if we made it up?
But it's a created definition is what I mean.
Well, that's different. The function there.
So, I mean, you think it's fundamentally different than...
So look, the function that I will point to is, they say, I don't remember his first name, Webster, wrote the dictionary in the early 1800s because he said this: what they're going to do is try to change the definition of words so that they can undermine the meaning of the Constitution. So I need to fix the definitions and make sure they're in print. And it's like, God damn it, if it's not right. He did it. He called it. It's like, yeah, racism means this now. Okay. Like, really?
Yeah, no, it does change. It is a different definition.
And so it is. He's right. He was right. And so it verified his intuition on the subject. And so the issue is this: it's like, yeah, you can't trust anybody, especially if they can adjust the words to suit their meanings. And it's like, I don't mind you. Look, if you make up a new word and you have a meaning for it and define it, I'm good with that. As long as you're not doing this later and twisting it around, and then now it's the other thing altogether.
Oh, there's actually a word for what you're describing.
I love the English language.
I'm blanking on the name of it. There's actually, it's not, so it's in the same academic stuff on, what they call epistemic injustice or hermeneutical injustice, but there's actually a word for when people deliberately make their meaning unclear in order to create more power. And the example one of these authors gives is a boss who is making sexual advances on one of his employees. And then when she calls him out on it, says, "Oh, I'm just joking. I didn't mean that." And so there's it's like hermeneutical vagueness or something like that. I forget the exact phrasing, but it's basically when you deliberately make the meaning of words vague to give yourself more power. And it sounds like that is what you're objecting to, is that very often they're using words, and they're using words where, for example, racism could have one definition in one context and another definition in another context, but they don't tell you that they've changed the definition. And so when they make the accusation in one place, they could mean one thing or they could mean another. And one of those definitions seems really bad, and the other is, one that you could maybe debate, right?
It's interesting, that particular one is, the racist one is interesting because it's like this: it's a stigmatization of somebody by calling them that. And it's like, the interesting function of it is they change the definition, and now they loosely throw it about to people who would previously never have been considered to be so-called racists. Okay, which is equal treatment under the law is racist under this premise. And it's like, in a million years, 50 years ago, that never would have been said, right? And it's like, okay. And it's like, so it is like it's used to stigmatize their opposition, and it's like just to quiet them down, to cause them to silence their own opposition to the ideology as it presents itself. And it's like, it's a failing system, because it's like this: this is a goofy word terminology, but it's a liberal use of the thing too extreme destroys the value of the content or the value of the epithet, right? And so it's like, I see it as a sort of self-limiting problem, because it's eventually you keep making up nonsense and it doesn't make any sense to anybody, and nobody cares what you say because you're not speaking anything that means anything, right? So it's okay.
I see what you're saying. There's an idea that when you use a label like that repeatedly, you're almost devaluing the brand. And it's, you know, it's almost like people who have studied how language creates power for nearly 100 years have figured out how to use language to create power.
I would think that it has been quite successful. And there's interesting books that I've ordered that are on the way, which is like transformational linguistics and transformational syntax. I'm like, what are these people talking about? Right?
Is this like NLP stuff? Because that's another.
I don't have a clue, man. I saw these books. I got Steve Richards that recommended. He said Chomsky wrote a book called Transformational Linguistics. I'm like, what the hell is that? So I have to find it, and I couldn't find it, but I found other people writing books of similar names, right? Transformational linguistics and transformational syntax. I'm like, what is that? What are these guys talking about? Just because it's just curious, right? It's like, and it's on. You've already used to. You're like looking at the people who take advantage of what these linguistic guys have been working on. And that's what it sounds like, at least.
So I would, there's something that I wrote about both on my blog and somewhat in the book, which is that I think you're looking at you can look at the accusations that they push towards people as a truth claim and debate that. But I don't know that the accusation will be devalued because there is an activist power structure behind it. So when you think about that analogy of devaluing something, it's obviously based in the idea of inflation, right? Like if you just print more of something, it's worth less. But the way that you can keep a currency valuable is if it's gold backed. In other words, if you print more but you have more gold that can be transferred for, then it's not actually losing value.
Right.
And I would argue that even though the accusation is being used more, the political power or the gold behind it, if you will, is actually also increasing. So
I understand.
The accusation might come, but and you can debate whether or not that accusation is true, but the organizations and groups making the accusation actually have more political power than they used to and more ability to enforce consequences on that accusation.
I understand.
So
I understand.
So there's like, and this is also one of the things that I've learned from studying things in the sort of activist institutional level, is that very often people like yourself who are sort of concerned with the truth question think that the way to fight something like that or to change it is to simply show somehow that it doesn't make logical sense or it's untrue, rather than look at the power structure that is actually the way that someone gets canceled or fired or has this accusation enforced upon them.
I think you're right. Yes, no, and I would not. I would say that you're more right than the argument you're making that I didn't make. Okay, which is like this. It's okay. The issue is the power structure is the important thing to look at, because it's like the issue is the emotional hold that's being put on the people who are the ones following this that is making the difference. And it's like the emotionality is of interest here, and so it's like, and it is of primary significance. And so we're in agreement, I think, and that's like, it's more power structure studies now. So you're pointing me in the direction that's okay, different. What happened to America? Now I'm like, okay, let's go over there and redirect and consider this from a different perspective, because it's like a useful perspective. I think it's quite useful, and it is emotional. So it's like, that's significant. And it is like, well, what's this? How do we absorb this information and move forward? That's the question, right? And it is, because I don't believe, and I've had multiple conversations. I talk to my patients a lot about such matters, and I don't believe that most people are bad. I think most people are good, and they want to do good and make things right and fair. And we all look at the world and try to make it right and fair as best we can. And many of us are led astray by liars. Okay, and that's the issue that I have, and I don't like them. I don't like people who lie to people and mislead them at the expense of the people who are doing the following, right? That's what I object to, which is taking advantage of naivete particularly. That just irks me to no end, okay? And so if people go, adults go into interact with one another and it's square up, clean, and everybody knows what they're getting into, that's one deal, and as much as we can know what's going on. But it's like when you deliberately mislead people and cause them to do something that's against their self-interest, that is harmful to them and to the community at whole, I have a problem with that. And so I think your studies in the activism are potentially excellent as an example, pointing in the direction of a useful, actionable set of tools to help understand and refabricate our world in a manner that is more just and whole, right?
I'd say too, if you're concerned with places where people are being misled or power is being abused, the issue of circumcision is definitely worth looking at more.
Oh yeah.
Because there is so much misinformation around that, and there is such an incredible power dynamic both between doctors and parents, and then the medical institutions and newborn children.
We're in agreement.
Yeah,
that's very good. I appreciate that. And I think that this is a good time to kind of wrap it up. We've been going at it for a while here, and it's
sure.
It's an excellent conversation, good points, and it's like the issues are pretty plain, and it's just there's a lot of work here. All right. I'm very interested to see about your work. So if you'll send me some links to some things, and we can put them in.
I can share them here. So circumcisionmovie.com is where you can watch the film, and it's on Amazon Prime, it's on Vimeo and iTunes and all the other places you get movies. And then my book, the Intactivist Guidebook, is on Amazon. That's the best place to get it. And you can also find it on my website, brendonmarotta.com.
Cool.
And the new one is not finished yet.
And have you got the name on the secret book yet?
I do. I don't want to share it though yet.
It's all
Actually,
right.
I've got two secret books. I've also got a novel that has nothing to do with anything activism. It's just a family-friendly Christmas story. But
nice.
That's a whole other story. Yeah.
Well, very good. Well, I look forward to studying your work a little bit and going forward from here. Maybe we'll have another chat again soon. Okay.
That would be fun. Thanks for chatting.
It's my pleasure. You take care, sir.
You too.